I mean, culturally, something has clearly shifted. I mean, I think it's easy, but also probably true to blame the sexual revolution in the 1960s. You know, my grandparents had an incredibly chaotic marriage in a lot of ways, but they never got divorced, right? They were together to the end, till death do us part. That was a really important thing to my grandmother and my grandfather. And this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, you know, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked out for the moms and dads, though I'm skeptical, but it really didn't work out for the kids of those marriages. And I think that's what all of us should be honest about, is we've run this experiment in real time, and what we have is a lot of very, very real family dysfunction that's making our kids unhappy.
Okay, so JD Vance is a sick MFer in a lot of ways. He's wrong about basically everything. So why wouldn't he be wrong about relationships too? To make it clear, and we're gonna dive more into the specifics, he is saying that, sure, the marriages were violent and unhappy, but at least they stuck it out. And thanks to the sexual revolution, which he blames for all the problems which he identifies now, we're gonna get to the numbers, it's not even true. The problems he identifies don't actually exist. He says, sure, that meant that some of these women could get out of these violent marriages. Maybe that was good for them. I'm not even sure about that. But wouldn't it have been better for the kids, for the mom to have stuck around and let the dad beat her for a few more decades? That's his opinion. Look, I don't know his parents, I don't know his grandparents. They can make whatever decisions for their relationship they want. That is the responsibility of every person. But for him to blanket imply that cultural and legal traditions changing to allow women to get out of abusive relationships was only arguably maybe good for them, but wasn't worth it after all because of the negative effect it had on the kids, is sicker than I can imagine. And again, he's identifying the problem as the sexual revolution. He doesn't seem to have a problem with the abuse. He doesn't seem to have a problem with, let's say, millennia of men routinely beating their intimate partners. That doesn't bother him. That's not worth fixing. It's not even worth discussing. No, the hippies and free love, that's the true problem, really. And I want to give you some more details on the relationship he's talking about there. So in Hillbilly Elegy, he talks about his grandparents as, in his words, violent marriage. He said his grandfather was a violent drunk before he got sober, and his grandmother was a violent non-drunk. In one instance, before he was born, his grandmother warned his grandfather that she'd kill him if he ever came home drunk again. He continued to drink, and so she tried to kill him. Mama, never one to tell a lie, calmly retrieved a gasoline canister, poured it all over her husband, lit a match, and dropped it on his chest. When Papa burst into flames, their 11-year-old daughter jumped into action to put out the fire and save his life. But they stuck it out, and that's really what's important at the end of the day. Even if your partner is beating you, setting you on fire, it's important to make it work. That is what JD Vance believes. And he doesn't just believe that as an author or a guy who's trying to promote his artistic work. He wants to be in charge of laws as a senator was. That seems like a dangerous position to put the country in, from my point of view.
Just as a quick aside, John, I gotta correct you because you are a coastal elitist. It's Mama and Pawpaw. That's those folks in Appalachia will not soon forgive you for that mistake. Okay. But no, in all seriousness,
it's not Mama.
No.
And Papa. Okay.
In all seriousness, this is quite frankly just one of the dumbest, most ridiculous, most disgusting things you've ever seen. Like, even the most frothing at the mouth, right-wing, crazy wingnut person will agree that if you're getting your head split open and gasoline poured on you in your marriage, you might want to start a new one. Like, this is not a message that appeals to anyone. Nobody thinks that they should endure physical, verbal, emotional abuse just so they could keep a marriage going, even for kids. Like this, nobody would think this was a sane argument except for the most like ridiculously religious God marriage forever covenant people. Like, this is a small minority of people who would hold this opinion. So if this guy's trying to curry popular favor with stupidity like this is absurd. I don't even know what to do with this.
You're 100% right. And bear in mind, this is a guy who would want Pawpaw. We're gonna say Pawpaw. He would have wanted Pawpaw to still be able to go out and buy an AR-15. Like, fresh off of beating Meemaw, he should not be blocked from getting an AR-15. Just to be clear, that is what JD Vance believes. So that's fun. Now here is culturally the core of this issue. The right needs you to believe, they desperately need you to believe that we are a decadent society that is falling under the weight of our own cultural evolution and hubris. They cannot allow you to understand that some things are getting better for a couple different reasons. One, because you have to be terrified about the state of American culture in all aspects. Two, because to identify the things that have gotten better, you might start to wonder why, and then you might start to realize some of the things that were causing problems for us to begin with. And I want to jump into two examples that he will not be able to acknowledge. One is that domestic violence is thankfully much more rare than it used to be. The rate of reported domestic violence significantly declined in recent decades, decreasing from 15.5 per 1,000 women and 2.8 per 1,000 men to just a third as many women, and it looks like 1/5 as many men. That's just from 1995 through 2015. I mean, God only knows if we were going to go back to the time of Meemaw and Pawpaw. I mean, God only knows at that point. But thankfully, it's dropped a lot. Less partners are hitting each other, abusing each other in a variety of different ways. Now, there is evidence that has ticked back up during the pandemic. That is tragic and it needs to be stopped. But this is good news. It's also good news when we identify the reason that thankfully far fewer men are beating their partners. Now, he's never going to acknowledge that was a problem. He can't acknowledge the progress. But let's also bear in mind that he wants you to believe that divorce is a massive, massive problem. Now, how big of a problem is divorce? Well, I'm sure, as you know, half of all marriages end in divorce. And you know that because people have been saying that for literally decades, and it doesn't matter what the actual numbers are. That's not remotely true, and yet most people seem to think half of all marriages end in divorce. No, divorce rates are actually at a 50-year low right now. Just 14.9 out of 1,000 marriages ended in divorce in 2020. The latest in a steady decline since divorce rates hits their peak back in 1980. Wow. In his state, nationally, it's going down. These are good things. They're not good things because divorce is the worst thing. If you're in a marriage that needs to end, you should be able to get divorced. And thankfully, troglodytes like JD Vance are no longer in charge, so you legally can get a divorce. You used to be legally bound to your abusive spouse. That's the world he wants. Now, thankfully, these situations have improved. And let's keep it that way by keeping people like JD Vance out of power. That would be my suggestion.
Well, John, the kids won't have a front row seat to a 2x4 to their mother's head. Like, obviously, this is hindering their development, John. It's ridiculous. This idea that kids aren't affected by the abuse of their parents is crazy, or that these abusive people don't abuse the kids too. So it's like you get the PTSD from watching your parent be constantly abused, and then you yourself are on the receiving end of that type of violence. This is the type of thing that back in the days would just straight up disqualify a guy from even thinking about trying to run for public office. But in we've devolved so much in our politics and what our expectations are for the people who are ostensibly running our lives, that this won't even get him out of the race.
Yeah, 100%. It's not the worst thing that he said recently, honestly. It's top 20, maybe, but not the worst.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.